For USCFootball.com, I'm Keely Eure here with Dan Weber for instant analysis of USC's 37-14 loss to the Texas Longhorns. And Dan, there's a lot to talk about in this game. But first off, let's start with just the game as a whole. I mean, the first quarter showed what this USC team can be, but the next three quarters showed who this team really is.
Yep, I mean, to quote a senior coming back to Texas, Cedric Ware, you play the way you practice. Mm-hmm. I know I've heard that before, and I think Cedric said, they become lazy at practice. They aren't going hard. They don't have leadership, especially on offense, except maybe from a couple of freshmen. Yeah. They can't run the ball. They can't block anybody at the line of scrimmage, and can't do a great job of protecting JT, who is, and I will quote, T. Martin here. He's awesome. He's really, really, really good. I mean, he's way better than a freshman ought to be. In these circumstances, considering the kind of protection he gets. So, you saw both sides of the coin. You saw the upside. They get that 14-3 lead, and then they give up 34 straight points. Not so good.
Yeah. As Dan alluded to, we got some honesty in the post-game interviews from senior Cedric Ware, who said that the last 2 weeks of practice, USC practiced lazy. They didn't have fire, they didn't have passion or urgency in practice, and that's what we saw on the field. And U.S. Clay Helton's, going into this week, going into the Washington State week, are they going to change anything about practice? And he said, "What do you mean?" And then when you press further, what did he say?
Well, I mean, this is interesting. Your senior, really tough guy, Cedric Ware, tells you how he thinks the team's practicing. Yeah. And Clay doesn't even act like he understood the question. All he basically said was, we lose a day this week because of the short week. Thank you, Pac-12, for a Friday night game. So it's going to change the practice schedule. And the question was not, when are you going to practice this week, Coach? It's, how are you going to practice this week, Coach? Not even an inkling that Clay understood the question. And if you don't understand the question, coming up with an answer is really hard.
Mm-hmm. To be fair, Clay Helton did say this loss is on me, so he did take accountability there. But when you ask the coaches what went wrong, like talking to John Baxter after the game, he said he's going to have to look at the tape. He doesn't know what went wrong with the poor punting performance that happened tonight. But you see guys like Cedric Ware who are taking responsibility. What does it mean when these coaches aren't taking at least responsibility like their players are?
Well, I think the one thing that they're kind of backing off of is, if you take responsibility and you say it was this, this, and this, then you're forced to change some things. You're forced to say, we know what's causing this. We're not going to keep doing it. But that would require, as we asked, T. Martin, are you practicing hard enough? Are you, if you haven't run in practice full pads, physical, goal line offense, and now you're in a goal line situation, third and two, fourth and two. What do? You haven't done it in practice. And T said, that's not his call. He doesn't decide how they practice. He just kind of gave you one of those, not my call. Said, I'm going to keep trying to trust everybody and call the plays aggressively. But I really sympathize with Clay. I mean, with T, in terms of, how do you make play calls when you're just not sure who's going to break down? You get on the, after a timeout, you're on the goal line, and you have a player who doesn't know the play, and two of the other players are trying to tell him what the play is, and at that point, the noise is pretty loud, and the ball is snapped before he's been told what the play is. I mean, that's obviously practice. That's obviously not being ready to execute when you get in a game. And, this is what happens. This game tonight is a result of how they've practiced the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and when we asked after the Stanford loss if anything's going to change, Clay Helton was very adamant about not changing anything. And it seems like this week, at least from what we've heard, nothing's going to change. What do these coaches expect if nothing's going to change, but we see the same performances out on the field?
I mean, one would think it might be to the point where the players start demanding. I mean, Cedric said, we need leadership on offense. We need guys to step up, become vocal, really call out people in practice. But again, he's not the guy setting the practice schedule. As he said, well, the schedule's been kind of working for the last, 3 years and da-da-da. But they have to practice better. If they don't practice better, this is the result. And, what makes it so hard is you look at this game and you say, what might have been, what could have been there, what didn't happen. I mean, just, the dumb decision to go for the punt block when the guy's standing on the back line. And the only way they can get out of there and get a first down, as I said, before the ball was snapped, is USC's going to, commit a roughing the punter, which is exactly what they did. It was a shorter punt. When they normally practice it, they've got the guy 15 yards deep like they normally are. Well, in that situation, he's only got about 11 yards deep. Yep. So when you come in kind of at the same angle you've been practicing, which instead of taking you to the foot where the ball is, it takes you into the body a little bit more. That was not worth the risk of giving them a chance to get out of there. That was just so failing to execute. When Texas is on their own goal line, and then failing to execute when USC is on Texas's goal line, that's just not good coaching. I mean, that's just a team that's not ready to do the things you have to do to get it right. And then they obviously have a breakdown on the field goal block in terms of their blocking for the field goal, and they get their, Chase McGrath probably almost certainly with an ACL and out for the year. Yep. I mean, that was another disastrous breakdown. And then you've got two punters on scholarship who keep hitting the ball. I mean, you never see that. I mean, and at this level, that never happens. Yeah. And yet, you've got both guys that are doing it. I mean, it got to the point it was so bad that the last, I think, 12-yard punt, you heard nothing but laughter. I mean, people were laughing at USC's inability to just do the little things right. Pretty sad. Yeah.
As Dan alluded to, Chase McGrath is likely out for the season with an ACL. He left the field in complete pain and in tears, so feel bad for him about that. As not an injury, but is out, Porter Gustin was ejected for targeting. He was out for the second half of the game, but he will be out for next week on Friday against Washington State. So that's something with this loss that carries over into Friday.
Yeah, they didn't get a lot of breaks with the Big 12 officiating crew or the Big 12 replay guy. I mean, that's, they finally got the targeting on the unbelievably classic targeting that Texas committed, toward the end when it didn't mean anything. But, and they didn't call it on the field. So it was like an absolute, complete, no question targeting. Not one of the 7 officials threw a flag. But when USC had a guy step with his toe on the out-of-bounds line, they hit 2 flags. Boy, they were right on that one. Not a good job. This was kind of embarrassing for the Big 12. But, hey, you go on the road, life is going to be tough. You got to play better. And USC didn't play well, not nearly well enough.
Yeah, also I got to mention that safety that wasn't a safety. That goal, yeah.
That's right. That's the third play at the goal line. All 3 went completely against USC in every way they can go against USC. And the guy was down. The ball wasn't out of the end zone, but they saved him 2 points, and USC would have gotten the ball back. But but again, that's what you expect.
Mm-hmm. Going forward, what are you seeing for this team? We know that there's probably not going to be any changes in practice. USC has a short week. They will be on the practice field on Monday. The only bright spot about this game, one, was the more chemistry with the wide receivers, but 2, this was not a Pac-12 game, so of course they are still, their hopes and dreams are alive in the Pac-12. What do you see going forward for this team?
Well, I think they're going to build around JT. I mean, I've been saying it all along. He's really, really, really good. And maybe you have to, and T even admitted, maybe you have to throw the ball to set up the run and play that quick game all the time. I mean, here they realized, what's the point of even calling a run play? So we'll throw it, even though that puts an awful lot of pressure on the quarterback. He can handle it, I think. And, you line up and then maybe you could open things up a little bit for the run game, but it doesn't look like you have the manpower or the execution or the practice habits or any of that to execute properly so you could lead with the run. I know they wanted to lead with the run to take some pressure off JT. I think they're just going to have to throw it to JT and Amon-Ra and just say, take us as far as you can and we'll try to at least get some pass protection down if we can't run block. But this is, I would say this, if they decide and absolutely stick to it that there are going to be no changes, there will be changes.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next, is that based on my Twitter mentions, it seems like a couple coaches have a hot seat now. What is your read about the seats and their warmth?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to find a coach that probably has kind of a hot seat. I think the D-line played well, but this is a tough deal now. So I think the more you say we're not going to change anything that we're doing, and literally 100% of the USC fan base does not agree with that. Yeah. So when you put yourself on an island where you're saying one thing and nobody who follows USC believes you, that's a bad place to be.
Yeah. Well, what benefits Clay Helton and staff by not being open and being at this point at least open to changes?
I don't know if they've committed so strongly, in terms of maybe there are discussions going on that we don't hear and we don't see, where they say, no, we're convinced this is the right way to do things. We know it in our hearts. We absolutely understand this. And then would it be an admission of, man, we don't know what we're talking about, if you go back and say, we have to practice differently? Because they've been so adamant about practicing this way without a lot of contact, without a lot of physicality, without going really hard. We saw the change from mock game week to once the season got here, where they just go against scout team guys who very often aren't even going very hard for scout team guys. I mean, you'd like to see them going hard at least, but so it's hard to be prepared for a team like Texas. Not that great, but they got inspired tonight, and they started playing better, and that didn't look like the Texas team the first 2 weeks, and the crowd got behind them, and everything started happening, and USC didn't have what it takes to resist that, even though they got out to the 14-3 lead, and even though it looked like Texas was going to have trouble, staying with USC's passing game, they just couldn't sustain it. And Texas just fed off that and just took USC out of the game, completely. This game could not have flipped from the first quarter to the last 3 quarters any more than it did. Yeah. And give Texas credit. They really wanted it badly, and they played really hard, and USC kind of lifeless. USC doesn't look like they're having much fun. They don't look like much is happening on the bench. Everybody seems like they're going through the motions. Kind of looks like practice, and I guess that's kind of where we are at this point. They still are. They're fortunate. They do have it. They could still win the Pac-12 South.
They could.
Will it mean anything if you just cruise along and win on talent alone, and win the home games and not get, and maybe the Pac-12 teams that you got to play on the road aren't all that good, and you just squeak through? I don't think so. You can win the Pac-12 South and have it not mean anything. I think they have to start getting better, and they have to start getting better during the week in practice. Clearly, the last 2 weeks, they haven't gotten better in practice during the weeks. Yeah. And now here we are, with 2 embarrassing losses.
Yep, exactly. All right, that's going to wrap it up from Austin, Texas. For Dan Weber, I'm Keely Eure. For more, check out uscfootball.com.